Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, the place to come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker, and welcome to episode 183. Finding peace means healing first. Welcome back to a month that has been all about making real changes because they change your life. Remember earlier this month when we said that healing old wounds means you're no longer walking around wounded, hurting yourself, hurting others, hurting your relationships? Well, healing trauma definitely fits that description, and that is what we will focus on today. Before we get into it, I just want to have a disclaimer here that this is not a substitute for therapy. This isn't so you can self-diagnose, but hopefully that you can gather some information today that might be helpful to understand you and loved ones better. And I think we really can't talk about empowerment and assertiveness and finding peace and hope if we ignore trauma. And so many things are trauma that we don't realize too. So let's talk about what is trauma. What is a good definition? Well, according to Psychology Today, trauma is a deeply disturbing event that infringes upon an individual's sense of control and may reduce their capacity to integrate the situation or circumstances into their current reality. It can come from overtly distressing events like war or combat, natural disasters, physical or sexual abuse, or catastrophic events. But it can come from less obvious events as well. End quote. So that definition includes big and little trauma, what clinicians call big T and little t. Okay, big trauma is the concept we think of the most when we hear the word trauma or traumatic event. That can be life-threatening, life-altering. You're in fear for your life. Maybe you witnessed a loss of life, losing a loved one. Maybe a big medical trauma of your own or that of a loved one. A car accident, another big event. Like the definition said, natural disasters, house fire. There's a list of big things, but you get what I'm saying. That is big T, okay? And those are big events that can create some serious post-traumatic stress disorder for people. They alter your life. They change it. So those we often understand, whether we're going through it or have gone through it, or we witness someone else going through it. We have a lot of compassion, I think, and try to have understanding and patience. What we don't talk often enough and what we focus more on, I think, on the show is little t. And here's a list of some of the things that are considered little traumas, or I call them micro traumas. And what I want you to think about is when I list these, they may not seem so bad in and of themselves, but I want you to think of two things. One, is it acute or chronic? Is it a one-off and we can get over it and the rest of our days are healthier and happier and all of that? Or is it ongoing, low level, but it never goes away, so you never feel safe? And the other thing is, how many have you had? And in what span of time? And how old were you? So when you hear some of these things, I want you to imagine that if a lot of this stuff happened when you were really young, that's going to be a bigger deal. A, because you probably didn't have people around you to help you heal. And B, you were too young to know how to metabolize it like an adult can. So one of the smaller traumas, relatively, is conflict with family members. And there's a whole continuum of this, too. We've talked a lot about this on the show. Whether you have a falling out with your brother, all the way to you've either been cast out of your family or you have estranged yourself from your family because they're so toxic. Emotional abuse. Yelling, shaming, manipulating, gaslighting, controlling. We really underestimate emotional abuse and its impacts on the body. Remember, the impacts are the same as physical trauma. A toxic work environment, especially one that you are going into day in, day out for a while, that will wear you down. Infidelity, divorce, some other kind of betrayal by your partner, that's a big deal. Bullying, and whether that's when you were a kid at school, or whether that's happening in your neighborhood or your workplace or your friend group, it doesn't matter. Being rejected by a friend group or other community that you care about, like maybe your church or your Facebook group or your neighborhood or a professional organization that you belong to and really like. Another mini trauma is a sudden or extended relocation or a move where you don't feel grounded. And change is loss, right? And it can be traumatic to go from one area of the country or the world and go to a completely different environment where everything is different than where you came from. Having a child or adopting a child. And finally, financial or legal worries, especially if these are chronic. Or you've had a big thing happen like a loss of your job or your partner loses their job or gets fired. So those are some smaller traumas relatively, but remember, I want you to think about how many have piled up for you and how long has this been going on. So some of the symptoms of trauma, and boy, we could talk all day about these. I like the list that I found from Mayo Clinic because I thought it was a little more comprehensive than other resources. So, and again, this is a continuum of each of these things from horrible to manageable. So don't write something off because you think it has to be awful in order for you to feel it. So intrusive memories, recurrent, unwanted, distressing memories of the traumatic event. That's pretty common. I think most of us are aware of that one. Flashbacks where you kind of relive the traumatic event as if it were happening again. Upsetting dreams or nightmares about the traumatic event. I would add to that, it's not on this list, that you can wake up with panic and not really remember what you dreamed about. All you know is that you don't feel safe. Severe emotional distress or physical reactions to something that reminds you of the traumatic event. Remember, your subconscious works in categories, and if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, your brain's going to think it's a duck. So avoidance is a big one because obviously you want to feel safe. If you've ever had anything bad happen, think about how you would avoid that person, that restaurant, that situation, because it's too painful and it brings up too much anxiety. And, your brain is like, we don't want this to happen again. So you're trying to avoid thinking or talking about their traumatic event. You don't want to even deal with it. You're avoiding places and activities and people that remind you of the traumatic event. You don't want people asking you either. So avoidance is a big one. Negative changes in your thinking and mood, like negative thoughts about yourself or other people or the world in general. Some hopelessness about the future. And that doesn't have to be suicidal. It can be, right? You just don't have a lot of hope. Memory problems, like having trouble remembering important aspects of the traumatic event because you have blocked it out. Difficulty maintaining close relationships because you're not emotionally available. Feeling kind of detached from family and friends. Losing interest in activities you used to enjoy. Feeling kind of emotionally numb and having a hard time experiencing positive emotions. The next category the Mayo Clinic talks about is changes in your physical and emotional reactions. They're also called arousal symptoms. So easily startled or frightened by like a loud noise or something happening, always being on guard for danger. Self-destructive behavior, numbing out, like drinking too much, driving too fast, Trouble sleeping, that's a big one for people. Trouble concentrating, irritable, you have angry outbursts, maybe some aggressive behavior, overwhelming guilt or shame, or both. And for little kids, 6 and under, reenacting the traumatic event usually comes out through play. When I did play therapy, you could see it. I remember after 9/11, I could really see the objects being used and the things being played out in the therapy. And then for little kids, frightening dreams that may or may not have anything to do with the traumatic event. They're just frightening for them. So those are some symptoms of trauma, whether it's big T or little t. And what you may not recognize, and this is a very important aspect, is this may have become so normal for you, like that's how you operate. Like people tell me, I can never sit still. I'm always hyper. I have a hell of a time falling asleep every night. You kind of have this, I don't know if I want to call it low level, but maybe baseline rather, anxiety and vigilance. Staying very busy so you don't have to focus on it. So you kind of stay stuck in a fight or flight or fawn. We're going to get into fawning in a second. So you have this ongoing humming of anxiety where that's your baseline, and then you can get super triggered when shit happens, when you have fear creep up, when you get triggered by something that either is very similar to the event or looks like it symbolically. So hypervigilance, right? And then we can numb out with substances, carbs, shopping, work, other projects. And then fawning, which is people-pleasing. People-pleasing started as parent-pleasing. So if you didn't feel safe as a kid or something happened, you either were going to lash out or you were going to self-protect. And you may still do that in your adult relationships, like deferring to other people, not wanting to rock the boat, avoiding conflict at all costs, right? Because you don't want any trauma. People who grew up with mom and dad fighting all the time, that's a little T trauma. And you want to avoid that at all costs. So you will end up fawning instead, getting good grades, being the perfectionist in your family, anything to avoid disapproval, trauma, and abandonment. But then you get lost in your relationships because you have such poor boundaries with other people and you're so disconnected from your own feelings and your own needs. Lots of codependent behaviors happening here. And then what I find after working with relationships for years is a lot of reactivity because remember, like is going to marry like we've talked about here on the show many times. And so many relationships go south because both parties are just reacting to the other person out of their own trauma. That's often not looked at. So that means a lot of fear, a lot of defensiveness, and easy to anger, or pulling away for safety, shutting down, passive aggressive. One person's being triggered by fears of abandonment, let's say, while the other person is terrified of being manipulated like their family did to them. So, bottom line, neither party can be open and vulnerable and emotionally honest with good boundaries in their communication. They don't know how to be safe, and they don't know how to keep themselves safe in their relationships. So much of partner drama is trauma-informed, and that's why it's really important for us to look at it. So that gives you a nutshell of trauma. My hope is that you can look at it with a broader mind and don't write off things that seem too small for you. So healing is what we want to talk about today. But first, I want to mention it's always best to get professional support around a big trauma, such as abuse as a child, natural disasters, or other big tragedies that you've had. It is not recommended to work through this on your own. For the little traumas, could be different. Let yourself sit with the truth. That's the first part of healing. No more running from what happened and its effects on you. Now, like I've said before, I notice people will do this when actually things are going well in their life, or at least a lot better, They have a couple of safe people around them. They have a therapist. They have a coach. Maybe they have a support group. And it's because they can. Their psyche knows, okay, now we can fall apart because we're out of survival mode. So if it's many traumas from a current relationship or situation, you're facing the reality of what it will mean to stay away from them or it. Owning your part as well is key to fully healing around this. Even if it was just simply admitting that you allowed this person into your life, and maybe you ignored all those red flags in the beginning that you can see so clearly now. If you don't own your part first, you can't forgive yourself and you'll stay stuck. But more importantly, you're going to learn how to avoid it in the future and take care of yourself. So it isn't that you're just a victim and bad things are always going to happen to you no matter what you do, because that's not true. Not in relationships with people. There's a lot of things we can do to pick healthier people and to take care of ourselves with people in our life. Healing means letting yourself feel the emotions, doing the grief work, the process of anger, bargaining, sadness, acceptance, everything we talked about this month. Healing means allowing your body to heal. It's been holding all of it. It means less migraines, less illness and body pain. The emotional release allows your body, which has been holding all the pain and the anxiety for you, to let go too. So a lot of people find as they work through the emotional and the psychological impacts of trauma that their body starts to relax. It can get out of fight and flight for a while, which it needs to do to heal. You know, think about all the illness that we're seeing today as trauma informed. Because of the stress on the body. That's pretty scary stuff. Now, sometimes there's a little more anxiety up front as you first allow yourself to be vulnerable, to trust the therapy, let's say, to dig into old wounds. But over time, you're going to have less and less anxiety and panic. What you face can't get you anymore. Healing also means starting to feel all of your emotions again. Like all of them, not flatlining, not monotone, allowing yourself to feel anger and joy and peace and excitement and fear and sadness. In fact, often the sadness sets in around all we have lost, right? All the little things we didn't even realize we lost, all the unmet needs, all the lost opportunities, all those years of having disconnected relationships. That list can be endless for people. But it's just a part of the process that we must work through. Healing trauma means you're practicing radical self-care, finally. You're setting boundaries. That is the first thing I ask clients to do. Where are the boundaries? It is not safe to do the deeper, more vulnerable work until you're safe, which means you're telling yourself first that you don't have to do things that feel wrong. You can tell others no. You can detach. You can eventually honor what you need, even in small ways, like you just need to stay home today kind of thing. Every time you say that to yourself and follow through, you love yourself. You are healing all the boundary violations that happened before. I mean, trauma is the biggest boundary violation of all because essentially at the end of the day, it ruins your idea that you can trust and that you can feel safe and that you can trust yourself. Radical self-care looks like you are doing more pampering, maybe with just a little bit more sleep every night, better nutrition, taking care of things, downtime, quiet, meditation, healthy exercise, things that are good for you. You're working on better self-discipline around who you allow in your life and what you allow in your life. And the relationships that you do allow, you have healthy separateness, good boundaries, good differentiation. And finally, you're reaching out more for help in healthy ways and letting safe people help you, which I think can increase your feelings of being loved and nurtured and that you can trust a little bit. Trauma and betrayal ruin how we see ourselves, how we see the world, and what we think is possible. That's why allowing safe people to help us heals us on more than one level. Healing trauma, walking through the recovery process, and doing the grief work is so crucial to gluing yourself back together enough to find the peace that I think you deserve. I don't think we can really fully live life while we're tamping down and stuffing some awful things that need to be unearthed and honored. The feelings finally felt and validated with another human so that we can finally make sense and realize why our struggles with anxiety, relationships, and self-abandonment finally make sense. They were never happening in a vacuum. So if you listened here today and feel as though you need some help healing, please reach out. If it's the big T stuff, find a therapist. If you've done all that or you just still struggle and you need some support to move forward, grab a coach. Support groups are great too, so you don't feel alone. For those of you celebrating Hanukkah and Christmas and other holidays this season, I wish you peaceful, loving, and meaningful moments. For those of you who are hurting, know that you are not alone. Don't isolate. Reach out in what ways you can. So today we talked about how trauma comes in many different forms and levels of severity, and how important it is to work toward healing so we can feel more grounded, more glued together, and have more peace in our life. As many people either think about or actually engage with more family this holiday season, it can be a really triggering time of year where many of you may struggle. Others may just have anxiety and not even know why. Either way, finding ways to heal and reclaim your life is the way to peace and hope that things can actually be better. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Be sure to check the show notes at ownitpowercast.com and get the newsletter each Tuesday if you don't already. For those of you who are traveling, safe travel. Be well. So pay it forward. Keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.